One small act of kindness, years ago. He thought he'd never see that stranger again, but fate had other plans. And when his life was in danger, that stranger came back in the most unbelievable way. This story will make you believe in karma, destiny, and the power of good deeds. Subscribe to Minutes of Moral for more life-changing real stories. Like, comment, and share to spread this powerful lesson. Years ago, when Mark was just a young mechanic in his 20s, he didn't have much. His days were long, greasy, and repetitive, spent under the hoods of old cars in a small-town garage that barely paid enough to keep food on his table. But even then, something in him refused to ignore people in need. On that rainy night, the street was slick with fresh rain, streetlights flickered behind curtains of drizzle, and Mark was exhausted, longing only for his small apartment and a hot cup of instant noodles. But when his headlights caught sight of a car with its hood up and hazard lights blinking in the darkness, something tugged at his heart. He slowed down, pulled over, and stepped out into the cold rain. A young man stood by the car, drenched to the bone, fumbling with his phone. His name, Mark would learn, was Eric, a college student driving back to campus after visiting his sick mother. Mark didn't ask many questions. He just rolled up his sleeves, ignoring the rain soaking his work shirt, and got to work. For nearly an hour, he lay on the wet ground, his hands freezing, knuckles scraped by stubborn bolts and rusty engine parts. Eric tried to hand him money when the engine finally coughed back to life, but Mark waved it off. "Just help someone else someday," he said, his voice barely audible over the steady drumming of the rain on metal roofs nearby. Eric promised he would. Then Mark disappeared into the night, never imagining he'd see that young man again. Years moved on. Mark married, became a father to a daughter named Lucy, and life seemed good until hardship came knocking. His wife fell ill. The garage he worked at closed down when the owner retired. And Mark, already in his 50s by then, struggled to find another job. He sold their car to pay for hospital bills. And when his wife passed away, Mark poured everything he had left into raising Lucy alone. But the burden was heavy. To keep the lights on and food on the table, Mark took odd jobs, fixing fences, mowing lawns, doing repairs for neighbors. He never complained. He never expected a reward. Kindness to him was simply what people did for one another. Then came that fateful night. Mark, now gray-haired and slower in his step, was picking up groceries for Lucy's college send-off party. He never made it past the cereal aisle. Pain shot through his chest so violently that the floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Shelves blurred. His bag of groceries tumbled, cans rolling away as other shoppers screamed for help. No one knew what to do. Some filmed. Some dialed 911 with trembling hands but stood frozen. And through the haze of pain, Mark heard a familiar voice break through the chaos. Steady, urgent, commanding. "Move aside! I'm a paramedic." Hands pressed his chest. Air filled his lungs again. He was pulled back from the darkness, breath by breath, as someone whispered, "Stay with me, sir. Stay with me. You're not leaving yet." Hours later, Mark woke in a sterile hospital room. Beeping machines and antiseptic scents greeted him. But before he could panic, he saw a figure beside his bed. A man in a paramedic uniform with eyes both proud and gentle. "Remember me?" the man asked, voice soft but thick with emotion. Mark squinted, confusion giving way to wonder. "Eric." Eric nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "You saved me once, Mark. That night in the rain. I never forgot. I became a paramedic because of you. Tonight, I was meant to be here." Mark tried to speak, but words failed him. Instead, he squeezed Eric's hand, rough palms meeting smooth latex gloves, and let his tears say what words never could. The next weeks were a blur of recovery. Lucy, grown into a bright young woman, never left his side. When she heard the story of the stranger in the rain, she hugged Eric tightly, whispering thank you over and over again. The next weeks were a blur of recovery. Lucy, grown into a bright young woman, never left his side. When she heard the story of the stranger in the rain, she hugged Eric tightly, whispering thank you over and over again. Mark's small act of kindness had bloomed into something bigger than he could have imagined. Eric visited often. He brought home-cooked meals, checked Mark's vitals like family, and even helped Lucy apply for a scholarship she thought was beyond her reach. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Mark and Eric sat on the porch, mugs of coffee warming their hands. Crickets sang somewhere in the grass. "You know, Eric," Mark said, voice hoarse from emotion, "I never thought that one good deed would circle back like this." Eric laughed gently. "Funny thing is, I never thought a stranger would fix my old clunker in the pouring rain. That 1 hour you spent with me changed everything, Mark. Made me want to be someone who saves lives too." Mark smiled. The lines on his face deepened, but his eyes shone brighter than ever. "Kindness is never wasted, huh?" "Never," Eric agreed. "Sometimes the world just takes its sweet time proving it." Lucy joined them then, carrying a plate of warm cookies. She sat at her father's feet, leaning her head on his knee, a quiet moment of love, of gritty life lesson. Every act of kindness plants a seed, and someday, that seed might save you. Have you ever done something kind that came back to you? Share your story in the comments, share and subscribe to Minutes of Moral. For more inspiring true stories that remind us, good deeds never die.